If you search Japan on YouTube, you see a country living in the year 2050, a sort of cyberpunk utopia filled with neon, bullet trains, and robotics. But if you actually live here, you quickly realize that you've been sold a beautifully orchestrated illusion. Behind the glowing screens and robotic waiters, Japan's actual operating system is fundamentally trapped in the 1990s. Today we will be looking at the analog paradox, how a country that brought you the Walkman and the PlayStation became structurally paralyzed by a fear of software. To do this, we will look at 5 highly publicized moments where the high-tech facade collapsed, exposing the 20th century bureaucracy running the country. To understand how deep this resistance to technology goes, we have to start at the absolute top of the government. The first crack in the facade happened in 2018. The Japanese government had appointed a new minister of cybersecurity, one Yoshitaka Sakurada. At a parliamentary committee, he was asked a basic question about USB drives at nuclear facilities. He looked completely confused. He then publicly admitted that he had never used a computer in his entire life, stating that he had always directed his staff to do it. Now, on the surface, this just looks like a really funny political gaffe. But sociologically, it perfectly illustrates the ironclad rule of Japanese corporate and civic life known as Nenko Joretsu, or seniority-based promotion. He wasn't given the cybersecurity portfolio because he understood technology. He was given it because he was 68 years old and it was his turn to be a minister given his age and his tenure. The system prioritizes hierarchy and order over competence. When your top technological decision makers view software as an administrative task for their assistants, innovation completely stalls. But putting somebody in charge of digital security who had never sent an email before is actually just the tip of the iceberg. Because up until very recently, the government wasn't just ignoring modern computing, they were actively, legally banning it. In mid-2024, the Japanese government celebrated a massive victory. There was no longer a legal requirement to use floppy disks. You heard me right. Until 2024, there were still over 1,000 government regulations explicitly requiring businesses to submit documents and data on 3.5-inch floppy disks or CD-ROMs. This isn't a quirky tech lag. This is a masterclass in bureaucratic paralysis. The laws were written in the 1990s specifying that floppy disks were the medium. In Japan, changing a law requires immense political capital, endless meetings, and the risk that you might disrupt the harmony. So rather than update the legal text to say cloud storage, massive corporations and local governments were forced to scour eBay for vintage, overpriced floppy disks for over 2 decades to stay compliant. They chose the friction of outdated hardware over the friction of changing a rule. Buying vintage tech off of eBay to appease a 1990s law is kind of funny when it comes to administrative paperwork, but what happens when that exact same analog obsession is tested by a global crisis? At the height of the global pandemic, Tokyo had a massive problem. Their official daily COVID numbers were constantly behind or wildly inaccurate, and the reason why is staggering. Hospitals were legally mandated to handwrite all patient data onto paper and then fax it off to the Central Ministry of Health. Once the fax arrived, then clerks there had to manually read the thermal paper and input the numbers into a spreadsheet. Once the COVID cases spiked, there was such a volume that it actually jammed the fax machines and totally broke the entire medical reporting infrastructure. This exposes the fatal flaw of the analog paradox. There's a deep cultural belief in Japan that physical paper is secure and tangible, while digital encrypted data is invisible, therefore dangerous. They had world-class medical facilities and incredibly advanced hardware, but their data transmission pipeline relied on technology from 1985 because no one wanted to accept responsibility for digitizing the system. Speaking of physical paper, this refusal to trust the digital world led to perhaps the most Japanese paradox of the entire pandemic. In 2020, as the world went into lockdown, Western companies seamlessly transitioned to use Zoom and DocuSign. But in Tokyo, thousands of salarymen were forced to commute onto crowded trains and go into completely empty offices. Why? To simply physically stamp pieces of paper. In Japan, digital signatures are still widely rejected. To authorize a bank transfer, sign a contract, or fulfill an important document, you're going to need your hanko. And this is a personalized carved ink stamp. A multi-billion-dollar corporate deal could be held up because a middle manager forgot a carved piece of wood at home. You could think of this as the ultimate victory of tradition over utility. This is a country with some of the fastest internet speeds in the world, but they can't do remote work because their infrastructure is still entirely dependent on red ink. So we've established that Japan's infrastructure is terrified of using digital invisible data like the cloud, preferring vastly to use something tangible like fax paper or carved wooden stamps. But what happens when you apply that 1980s logic to modern data? You get the 2022 Amagasaki disaster. In June 2022, a contractor working for the city of Amagasaki needed to transfer some civic data. Instead of using a secure, encrypted, multi-factor authenticated cloud transfer, which is the universal world standard, he instead used a physical USB flash drive and put it in his bag. This wasn't just a few spreadsheets. That single piece of plastic had on it names, addresses, tax details, and bank information for all 460,000 residents of that city. The contractor then went out to an izakaya, which is a Japanese pub. At the izakaya, he got very drunk, and afterwards he fell asleep at the side of the road and proceeded to lose the bag with the USB flash drive in it. 500,000 people's civic identities were literally lost at the side of the road. This perfectly encapsulates the system's failure when it doesn't modernize its tech. It intrinsically felt that physically carrying this hardware across town in a suitcase was somehow safer and more official than simply setting up a secure software pipeline. They trust what they can touch, and in the 21st century, trusting physical hardware to a massive amount of data isn't secure. It's a catastrophic liability. Japan isn't a cyberpunk utopia. It is the world's most beautifully maintained museum for 20th century technology. They've engineered a perfect physical world, but are still fundamentally terrified of the digital. The neon lights and bullet trains are spectacular, but until the country values software innovation as much as it does hardware innovation and digital security as much as it does ink stamp security, then the operating system will remain frozen. Thanks for watching. I would love to see in the comments down below, have you experienced any kind of analog nightmare, whether in Japan or your own country? Let me know. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.